Well, thank you, Niall. That's very kind of you. I will say a few more words about myself, just so that you can situate me. So this is where I work, at the Existential Academy in West Hampstead. And we run all sorts of courses there. We run short courses, a foundation course, 5 master's courses in psychotherapy, coaching, counselling, pastoral care, autism, etc. And 2 doctoral programs, 1 to train counselling psychologists and 1 to train existential psychotherapists. So very busy, and we also run our private practice there, which is called Dilemma Consultancy. So these are some of the websites you might want to check out, but I have left at the desk some cards for the Existential Academy and the New School of Psychotherapy and Counselling for those of you who are interested, which has all the information on it. So you can collect those at the desk. I've also brought 10 copies of one of my books at £10 each, special author's prize, and 1 copy of my latest book, which is not the one Niall mentioned, because I've done another one since. So you might want to have a look at nspc.org.uk. Oh no, that was not the right thing to do. nspc.org.uk, which is where we have all our courses. Niall will be posting up my slides for you on his website, so you will find them, so you don't have to go to slideshare.net or researchgate.net. Okay, so these are the 17 books I have published, and this is the one that is for sale, which is a little book by Routledge on existential therapy, just giving the fundamental ideas. And this is the latest book, which just came out last week, and there is 1 copy of that for you if you want it. But that's a very big book. It's a World Handbook for Existential Therapy, which was edited by all our international colleagues worldwide. So that is the final word on existential therapy. But today I'm going to focus just on working with your emotions, and I will focus that on you understanding your own emotions and mastering your emotions, befriending your emotions, becoming alive to your emotions rather than running away from them. Because emotions are not just extreme responses to special situations, they are actually essential daily messages. Anton Chekhov said, any idiot can face a crisis. When something special happens, we automatically go into coping mode. But it is day-to-day living that wears you out. And it is your daily emotions and your daily ups and downs that create the picture of your life that becomes problematic to you, or that creates certainties that become difficult after a while, or that create holes into which you fall. It is that daily discipline of becoming more self-reflective and more aware of how you are alive, how you respond to the world. And just to help you locate yourself for this talk, I would like you to take just 1 minute to write down on a piece of paper in front of you as many things as you can in that minute that you love and care about. Could you please do that? All the things that you love and care about, not just people, but things, ideas, possibilities, whatever. Okay, I know that is frustratingly short, but it will have set you thinking about yourself and how you are connected to the world. How many of you actually included yourself in that? Not very many. Not very many. So you see, this is always one of my objectives when I work with my clients. It is to enable people to esteem and love themselves, first of all, before they start working out how they can love other things or other people in their lives. Because that's where it starts, isn't it? It starts with careful and wise attention that we pay to this unit of consciousness that we are ourselves. So that loving openness towards ourselves is actually an extremely important starting point for beginning to master our emotions. Because if we don't love ourselves and we're not open to ourselves, or we don't want to consider ourselves with this kind of careful attention, then we can't really do any work at all. Because all we do is trying to forget about ourselves, or trying to change ourselves, or trying to hide ourselves, or trying to disapprove of ourselves. And that is no good way to spend those 80 years that you, if you're lucky, will have on this earth. So think about that when you are in bed tonight. Think back to what you wrote down and ask yourself what it means to add loving yourself to that list, what that would take. All right then. So,
it helps you to grow.
Sorry?
It helps you to grow.
It helps you to grow, that's right. Okay. So, when we start to think about emotions, we often do that in rather curious ways. We've become quite used to these emoticons, which are extreme representations of particular states of mind. But the more we do that in this iconic way, and the less we actually have to ask ourselves, why do I feel the way I do? It becomes as if we have these different states and we just kind of flip from one into the other. But it doesn't actually work that way. Right now, you are feeling something. You are in a mood. Please look in and ask yourself what mood you are in. You are always in a mood, but that mood is many different colors. It's composed of many different micro-emotions that are related to the many different things that are happening in your life at the same time. So some of those will relate to your physical sensations, whether you feel at ease, whether you feel in a good state in your body. Some of them will be about your relationships and what is happening in those. And some of those will be foregrounded and some of those will be backgrounded. And some of these things will be about you and how you are evaluating where you're at in your life. And that will give you a good or a bad feeling that is also somewhere in the background, but there may be spikes of emotion that come out of that because of things that happen here today. And some of these things will be related to what you believe about the world, the things that matter to you, the values that you have. And it is those background value-based emotions that will actually color all the other ones too. So all of these layers are interrelated. And I would like to give you some ideas of how you might work with that for yourself and become more savvy about your emotions, which to me is not so much about emotional intelligence as about existential intelligence, because it is by no means just about your emotions. It's about the whole picture of how you are in the situation that is your everyday life. Very often, almost always, when I first start to work with a client, they come from a position where they fear their own emotions, or where they want to lessen them or get rid of them, because they've come to think of their emotions as pathological. They reject themselves for the emotions they have. So they say things like, oh, I'm just obsessed with love all the time, or and I just don't want to fall in love anymore, or I have an anger problem, please just help me overcome my anger problem. Or they say, oh, I have such low self-esteem, which is also an emotional thing, which is, you know, feeling really negative and bad about yourself all the time. So people learn to think of their emotional states in a very negative way, and they take the view that therapy must extirpate their emotions, must make them calmer and more at ease in some way. And of course, this is precisely why so many people, instead of going to therapy, take painkillers or go on drugs or drink loads of alcohol or smoke or do multitude of other things, including taking prescription antidepressants, because most of those things have one thing in common. They cut down your sensitivity. Isn't that interesting? If you're on antidepressants, what happens is that basically you're not processing so much. You're slowing down. You are basically making yourself less able to be vulnerable, awake, alert, acute, intelligent, sensitive, all of that. It makes it therefore a smaller life, and that's why sometimes for a small period it can help people to do that to themselves, because it may give them a moment of a pause for thought where they can start again to build their life and then open up again, hopefully. But of course, if people get used to that, a stumping, as it were, of the acuity of their lives, then they can't really engage anymore, and they can't learn so much anymore, because what they've done also is cut off their prefrontal lobes and their processing capacity. And they also stop processing things in dreams, for instance. So we know that when people come off various medications, they might have nightmares because the chemistry in their brain is so backed up that when they fall asleep and they have REM sleep, it goes berserk on them and they start to process wildly, and so they have nightmares. And then they often mistakenly conclude, oh, I better get back on the drugs because I can't cope. Now, what existential therapy does is to say, we can do better than cope. We can learn to find what we call existential courage, where we actually open our eyes, we open our senses, we open our feelings more, and we take it on the chin, and we learn to process stuff, and we learn to understand stuff, and so we create strength in ourselves, because the more we create these frameworks of meaning that fit things together and that help us find our way, the more we have this map in ourselves, or the more we become that map as a person, the better we can attune to the world. So that is the objectives. So when emotions are suppressed, which many people do, they actually literally start eating away and create holes inside of you. Where the emotion was, an empty vacuum is created, and that feels really quite unpleasant. And sometimes it can feel as if you're literally eating yourself up from the inside with suppressed emotions. Of course, when I was training from the end of the 60s and the early 70s, it was all the rage to just encourage people to abreact, as we called it, to express your emotion, to have more emotion, to wildly rage and take a tennis racket and knock on a mattress and shout out loud how much you hated your parents and stuff like that. And that was clearly not the solution either. What we don't want is excessive artificial emotion, and what we don't want, on the other hand, is suppressed emotion. What we want is mature, understood, lived through emotion that helps us understand what these emotions are about and what they're messaging us with. So that's what we're talking about today. So some people experience their emotions literally like power, a bit like the Freudian idea of the thermodynamics of life, So it's like water accumulating, and instead of the emotions flowing calmly, they might feel that the river of their emotions just builds and builds until one day there's too much water there and it will flood. So they know they can suppress their emotions for a lot of time, but then at certain times it overflows. And they, of course, experience that flooding as unpleasant and destructive, and they learn to compute their own emotions as destructive and to be feared. So they build bigger and bigger dams to dam their emotions in and suppress them. But there's always going to be waterfalls and tsunamis, and you can't suppress your emotions because your emotions are stronger than you are. This is a funny thing about the human organism, It does things to you. There are things you have to take into account about it, whether you like it or not. So you have to sleep every night. And if you don't, you bloody well fall ill. It's as simple as that. And you have to eat, and you have to drink, and you have to look after your hygiene. And if you don't do those basic things, things will go wrong of you. Illness will build, and things will get out of control. Well, you have to also attend to your emotional life, because if you don't do that, you'll pay the price for it. Right. So, controlling your emotions, I hope you will agree with me, is necessary to some extent, but it isn't the solution. And yes, some people, like the wonderful artist Vincent van Gogh, and that's how you say his name properly in Dutch, Vincent van Gogh, okay, you'll never get this wrong again. So Vincent van Gogh was a painter who was absolutely living his life for his art, and what that meant is living through his emotions and expressing them in all the strongest colors he could find. And we know he was driven mad, probably actually he had syphilis, but there we are. People like to think he was driven mad by his art and by his suffering. I doubt that it was quite as simple as that, but this picture sort of shows you these whirls of suns in a whirling sky. So you have both the darkness of the emotions and the light of emotions, and both those things can become rather overwhelming to some people. So I like to think of emotions quite a bit like that. They're the fire and the light inside of us, and we have to learn to tend that fire, because if we don't learn to tend the fire, it will either go out or it will burn the house down. So you have to understand what to do to create a fire. There are certain things you need to know about when you create a fire. You need to leave a lot of air in there. If you put it all down too much, there's no air going through, the fire will go out. And if you don't put enough fuel on it, it will also go out. So, now, the thing is that we feel bad when we have no emotions, when we become sort of like sculptures, like dead things, like robots. But we also feel bad when we have too many emotions. We feel great when we have just the right amount of emotion. It literally is as if the world is fueled with wonderful feelings that give us a sense of being fully alive, being real, seeing a future, feeling right about the past. Everything falls into its right place and we have just the right amount of energy to deal with whatever comes our way. So that sense of flow is very much what I think we should aim for. But of course, that picture is a rare picture. Most people who come to psychotherapists complain of two things, and you'd think these things are opposites, but actually most people complain of both those things. So they complain that they have too much anxiety, and they complain that they're too depressed. So it's quite interesting. Some people, of course, are particularly anxious and some people are particularly depressed. But for most people, not having good emotions means I'm too anxious or I'm too depressed. Now, that is not really surprising, and I will try to explain to you why those two particular things get singled out by people. So I'm going to show you how we can tune into our emotions and understand how to make sense of it. Now, my work on emotions is very much based in philosophy. I have studied all the different psychological theories of emotion too, but I have found them very lacking in human and existential understanding a lot of the time. I have found much more information, knowledge and wisdom from studying the philosophies of the Athenian philosophers, all of whom were interested in only one thing: how can people live better with their emotions? And they all had different solutions to that. And if I have time, I will tell you a bit about that. But I'm not going to start with that, because the more recent philosophers who have also done this, well, first of all, there was Spinoza, who I won't speak to you about, but who I learned a great deal from. If you're into philosophy, read his Ethics and you will understand your emotions really, really well after that, because he does this with great understanding. Then there's also Kierkegaard, Søren Kierkegaard, who is a philosopher who basically described his own emotions in great detail, and particularly those two things. So he had a lot to say about anxiety and he had a lot to say about despair, and despair is kind of the equivalent of depression in that. But the person who really created a proper existential theory of human emotions is Jean-Paul Sartre. He wrote a little book called Sketch for a Theory of the Emotions, in which he showed that our emotions are about doing magic. They are about us transforming the world and transforming ourselves in such a way that we fit ourselves into our situation. So that relates to this idea that, what emotion actually means. You understand, it comes from the Latin movere, which is moving out of. So emotions are movements out of ourselves into the world. They are the way in which we connect to the world. Now, everything we do is in a world. We are not separate items. We are not separate units. We are all connected to each other socially, and we are all connected to the physical world in millions of ways. So our emotions are the messaging service that tells us on a minute-by-minute basis how we find ourselves in relation to that world. It tells us how we are attuned to that world. It gives us constant feedback on how well we're doing with something. And when we start to tune into our own emotions, we can get really good at monitoring that and being at one with it, rather than trying to dim it down or being overwhelmed by it. So we can then use the emotions to help and enable us to make certain changes or adjustments and to feel pleasure in being alive and pleasure in meeting challenges, because every minute of our lives, the challenges we meet and the things we feel help us to get better at doing this complex thing of being alive. And when we start to see that actually this is the task we humans have to execute, the task of getting better at living, then we start to prize those emotions. We start to value them. We start to realize how invaluable they are. And we realize that the answer is never, never to kill ourselves, as did Ophelia, and we can kill ourselves in many different ways. Some people kill themselves dead, but many people kill themselves slowly over 10 years, and more people still kill themselves half for their whole lives, or 3/4. So when I start working with a person, the first thing I do is tune into them to get a sense of how fully alive they are allowing themselves to be. And you know what? The best proof of them being alive is their anxiety. The more anxious you're allowing yourself to be, the more you are ready to allow that fire of your energy, your dynamic, vital energy, to flare up and for you to become more alive and more attuned. Never fear your anxiety. Welcome it. Your anxiety is proof that you're alive. It's proof that you can learn. It's proof that you are in the business of experiencing things. So is, of course, depression as well. Depression tells you that you are sensitive to losses you have suffered. And those losses are very important. But never accept cold killing of yourself. Never allow yourself to become self-forgetful. And never allow yourself to live your life with suppressed emotion. I did far too much of that in my early life. It's such a waste of your time. But this painting by Fuseli, John Henry Fuseli, about the nightmare, sums it up so perfectly. And clients tell you this, you know, it's like a weight on my chest. I can't breathe. I just don't know what I'm feeling anymore. It's just too much. I can't take it anymore. This is how many people go through many years of their lives. Why? It's not necessary. Nobody requires you to be suppressed or to suffer that much. You are allowed to be fully alive and to get to know yourself and to breathe again. You can be free or freer than you are. And the first step to that is to stop allowing yourself to be oppressed or suppressed. And oppression and suppression always goes with suppression of emotion. So that's the other thing I look for in my clients. I don't just look for their anxiety. I also look for their rebellion. because they're rebellion. You know, if they say something nasty to me, they say, oh, what would you know about that or something, I think, yes, here we are. Here is a person who has a bit of rebellion, who says, you're not going to dictate to me. I know more about myself than you ever will. And that's a good start. Because that's what we all need to be able to do. To take responsibility for our inner understanding of who we are, what we can be, what we can become, what is possible, how we can improve, how we can grow, how we can develop, but not how we can suppress ourselves better. Never that. So, what is the meaning of our feelings? As I said, in the feelings is the energy of life, and we have to learn to use it, or it will use us. Kierkegaard, this philosopher I was talking about, had an interesting idea. He had the idea that people are a synthesis of the things that are possible and the things that are necessary. So, as I said, there are some things that are necessary. You know, we all have to deal with gravity. I can't just fly away, much as I would love to do that. I have to deal with my feet on the ground and gravity. And you learn to deal with that. You learn to walk. You learn to deal with the gravity. It's fine. It's not a problem. It helps you. Well, you have to deal with sleeping. You have to learn to sleep well, eating, all those things. There are things that are necessary. And then there are also things that are possible. But many of us just stick with the necessary things, and we make everything into a chore or a duty or something we come to resent, rather than realizing that we can actually find possibility and we can expand into areas that we didn't know before. But of course, the wisdom of Kierkegaard was to know it is never either or. It is always both and. I have to do the necessary and I can also do the possible. It is like breathing in and breathing out. It's like walking with 2 feet. 1, 2. I balance, I go from one side to the other. Something necessary, something possible. Something necessary, something possible. We have to learn to weave it together. We have to learn to inhale and exhale in our lives. It's about inspiration and expiration. We need to have our anxiety, which is our inspiration, something that is possible, but scary, it's possible, so I'm responsible, now I'm anxious, my energy is rising. Well, that's a great thing, isn't it? Because then you can do these possible things. If you're going to suppress your anxiety, you keep yourself down there. Welcome your anxiety and say, oh, today I'm doing something new. I'm going to the weekend university. Oh gosh, what's everybody going to think of me? Oh my God, will I be clever enough? Anxiety, anxiety, anxiety. Oh, maybe I won't go. Yes, I will go. Anxiety, anxiety. Oh, yes. And that's when you get the new in your life, isn't it? It's when you allow the anxiety to drive you forward and to rise with it. And when you learn to enjoy the rise of your anxiety, then you will feel that anxiety becomes more like excitement, like inhaling, and it is quite a natural thing to do. But you know, none of us can just inhale all the time. We also have to let go. When you go home, you got to be able to say, oh God, I'm exhausted. This was a busy day. Now I can't do anymore. Now I let go. I exhale. And that is actually where we become depressed, which is also why people like to drink alcohol at that point, because alcohol is a depressant. I'm sure you all know that. And if you don't know that, you know it now. Because that is what alcohol does. It makes you depressed. It makes you decompress, okay? So coffee, of course, makes you anxious. So coffee makes you anxious to make the effort, and alcohol makes you depressed to release and let go. This is why people go coffee morning, alcohol evening. Because you don't actually need coffee and alcohol. Your system can give you that buzz and that calm down, that release all by itself. Experiment and see whether you can make that happen, that breathing in and that breathing out all by yourself. So I like to think of it as people need inspirations, they need objectives and projects that inspire them in order for them to be willing to feel the anxiety. If there is something up here that is worthwhile enough, then people will open up to it and they will use their anxiety to educate themselves, learn something new, make an effort, experiment, etc., etc. And equally, we have to allow ourselves to lose and go into release, to go down again enough. And for that to be possible in a good way, rather than in a pathological or a sickly way, we need to be sheltered. We need to feel comfortable somewhere. So we have to have an exciting project to work with our anxiety, and we have to have the safety and comfort of a safe, sheltered situation to release our energies, go down and sleep. Restore our energies again, to get ready for the same cycle again the next day. But in terms of our emotions, this is very much about what we aim for with our anxiety is meaning and values, hard work. But at the end of the day, we have to let things go and we have to allow losses in our lives as well. So, what we gain by engaging with the world, with our anxiety, our aspiration, is values. Things we love. Remember? Things we love. And the more we connect to values, to things we love, and that are meaningful to us, the more vulnerable we also become to losing them again. And the losses of the things we love make us desperate, depressed, and go into decompression. If you remember this basic cycle, then you will be able to understand your emotions soon after. And we can then find a way to transcend anxiety and depression. I like to remind people that it is important to have some perspective on your life. To not get too preoccupied with your own tiny little focus on your own tiny little life. It is hugely important to focus on your tiny little life. But as always, you need to counteract that by also having the capacity to focus away from it and to remind yourself where you fit in. So you know how it works, don't you? The universe is huge, it's unoverseeable. Nobody knows where it ends or whether it ends or how it works. We really haven't got the foggiest notion. It's all speculation. What we do know, though, is that it is vast and that our galaxy is here somewhere, and there are millions and billions of other galaxies, And of course, when I say galaxy, I mean the Milky Way, which in itself is huge and, you know, has the solar system in it. And even in the solar system, we are a tiny little thing gravitating around our sun. So really, our own tiny little lives are infinitesimally small by contrast to the universe. But I happen to believe that since everything is connected, actually that tiny little importance of our tiny little lives is hugely important at the same time. And for all we know, you know, what we do in our own lives has an impact on all of this. I don't know. I don't want to speculate about it too much, but there is a way in which I can see that the way the universe is organized is incredibly similar to the way in which my brain is organized. And I can't escape from the recognition that the way the neurons and the neural networks in my brains function is very similar to how solar systems work too. And that gives me a sense of responsibility and hope about the importance of my own finite little life. And it makes it therefore important to me to make the most of my little life and to shine as much light into the universe as I can while I still can. And getting on a bit, I am more and more aware that there's a pretty big urgency behind that, so that makes it easier to do that. So there you are. That's a picture of a neuron with its dendrites and connecting up to other ones. This is what happens. Our neurons constantly reorganizing, restructuring the brain. We thought it was all sort of set in stone, but it isn't at all. It is fiercely alive and constantly changing. So every thought we have, every feeling we have, every emotion we go through, every experience we go through, every relationship we have, everything that we are and do changes our brains the whole time. And the more we change our brains, the more we harmonize our brain, the easier everything gets. That is as much as I've understood. So doing the daily work of tending your own internal garden that is your brain is a very worthwhile activity. And when people don't do that, obviously the weeds of their dendrites and their neurons connecting and disconnecting haphazardly become quite overwhelming. And I've become very modest about that by working with people who were, well, you know, I spent 7 years in my early career in the 70s working in psychiatric hospitals in France, which were very basic organizations where, you know, I worked with autistic people and schizophrenics, and I came over to the UK to work with R.D. Laing in anti-psychiatry and lived in a residential community with people who didn't want to take medication but who all had diagnoses of schizophrenia. So I've had my adventures with mental illness work over the years, but I've also worked a lot with people with long-standing trauma as well. I spent quite a long time in my career working with Holocaust survivors, especially Dutch Holocaust survivors who lived in the UK, but also survivors of wars and things. And when you work with people who have had that amount of crap happening to them in their early life, the amount of chaos in their inner world and in the way in which they relate to the world is quite overwhelming. And you have to learn to be quite specific in enabling those people to refine structures that work for them. And certainly providing them with no structures and more chaos is never going to work. That was one of the things I learned very early on. Because we are, as individuals, surrounded by rings and rings of other things around us, which we either love or loathe, it is very important to not just work with the individual, but also work with the person's environment. So you need to think about how people relate to their families or their partners, their children, with their peer groups, with the society and the institutions around them, with the culture and ideology, and with the politics around them. And in the last 3 years, I got drawn into working a lot with political situations because I became aware through my own experience of being denied British citizenship that there was a real problem in this country. And then I had to help other EU citizens and have seen the terrible situations they have been put through over the last 3 years. Totally not because they're mentally ill, but totally and exclusively and uniquely because of bad politics that have screwed up their lives and that have made them traumatized and experience some of the same things that I have seen in people who come from other such situations. The final circle around us is that of nature. Well, of course it isn't the final circle around us, because beyond nature is all this empty space, which is the universe. So we are situated within all these different rings, and it is important to be aware of how we are managing our relationships to all those layers of our lives. And each of those, of course, will provoke emotions in us. I normally cut up the cake into 4 big pieces, looking at what's happening at the physical level, what's happening at the social level, what's happening at the personal level, and what's happening at the spiritual level. What that means is, at the physical level, we are bodies that relate to nature and the things in this world. At the social level, we are egos that we create in relation to other people. At the personal level, we create a sense of identity and self in relation to this person we become and we change. And at the spiritual level, we relate to ideas, beliefs, and values, either religious ones or scientific ones, or any other kind of ideas for that matter. So as a person, we also become layered in that way. We have our physical skin around us, our social ego sitting here somewhere, a sense of self, and then a spiritual sense of ourselves in the middle. And of course, for different people, those different skins become more or less transparent, and those spaces take up more or less space. So everyone's picture will look quite different. And at each of those levels, as I said before, we are faced with limits, with necessities, including anxiety. So temporality is a big one. We are born and we will die. There is no other way out of life than death. And we live from the start with the knowledge that we will die at some point. And when a mother has a child, the first thing she discovers is the huge anxiety that one's baby may die. Fathers too discover this when they start looking after these tiny little babies. The moment life is created, the fear of death comes with it. And many of us suppress it, but it's something we have to learn to deal with. We also have to deal with entropy. It's something not many people talk about, but it's hugely important. You know what entropy is even? It is the fact that everything goes to pot over time. everything disappears over time. Everything gets undone over time. So when you clean up your house in the morning and you look at it in the evening, you realize all your work is gone. Everything has gone wrong again. Dust is created the whole time. Bits come off things the whole time. Things break down. This is a fact of life. And we need to learn to tend with it. And it is paradoxically related to the other fact, which is that everything grows as well. So things grow like in a garden, you know, in June, my God, the grass gets completely out of control. It just grows and grows and grows. But at the same time, you know, in autumn, things will break down. So there is growth and there is entropy, both at the same time. And these are the forces of nature that we have to learn to work with. Speaking of work, it's not just death that we are condemned to. We're also condemned to labor. We have to earn our keep. What that means is we have to go out and hunt for food or gather it in. We have to make an effort in order to survive. Now, of course, some of us are clever enough to get other people to make that effort for us. But that means we then have to do something else annoying, difficult, labor-like, to get that money to pay other people to do these things for us. We have to labor, we have to earn our keep. This is a rule of life that many people ignore. It's something I will not forget, and I have not retired yet, and I doubt that I ever will, because I'm so acutely aware of the self-esteem I get from earning my keep, from knowing that I earn my survival. That's what we have to do. If we don't, we're actually leaning on other people. Now, of course, there are many ways of earning our survival. Some very elderly people who play with their grandchildren or chat to other people to keep them cheerful, may be earning their keep that way. There are many ways to earn our keep. But we've got to be productive. We've got to add something. We've got to earn it. Never complain of your work, because it is what keeps the world go round, and you've got to do it. And the other things you've got to take into your stride is that every day you will have failures and losses. I'm sorry to break it to you, but there is no way to make yourself a happy life that you can smile in all the time and that you can control. If you're smiling all day long, you haven't got a clue what's going on. Life is full of losses, full of pain, full of little failures, you know, full of moments where we go, or that's not what I wanted, full of these things where you feel, what's wrong here? And it takes you days sometimes to work it out. What went wrong there? How did this happen? Well, these are the learning experiences that make you what you are. And it's better to just accept that that's how it is, because then you can use the feelings you have about that to actually be positive about it. So Jasper says, we forget that we must die, we must suffer, we must struggle, we are subject to chance, we involve ourselves inexorably in guilt. Not only do we fail and have losses, we also do things that are wrong for other people. Every step I take, I kill something. You do realize that. There's things crawling everywhere that you can't see. When I do this on my skin, I've just killed 1,000 things on my arm. We do stuff to the world. We have an impact on it. So these are the things, when we start to face up to these things, that allow us to treasure what is good and to make things better and more fluid and more enjoyable in life. This is a nice picture, because to have some good times, sometimes some other people have had to have a lot of very bad times, which is something I grew up being acutely aware of, being born in the Netherlands just after the Second World War and having had family members shot down in the street and others taken to concentration camps. And my parents had nothing. They'd lost everything. My grandparents became refugees, not because the Germans bombed them, but because the English bombed them in Arnhem. Wars are terrible things. That's why I am so pro-European, because Europe is about preventing this crap from happening. Thank you. So, what is this anxiety that paralyzes you? That painting obviously summarizes it wonderfully. The feeling of anxiety is angst, which comes from the Latin, but it comes actually from a Proto-Indo-European root, which is something like ang, and that means narrow, constriction. And that's exactly what it is. In anxiety, it's like your lungs constrict. People who have asthma, always very anxious. The asthma experience is an anxious experience. I speak from experience. And when you have that feeling that the world becomes narrowed down and you can't breathe anymore, that is when you get inclined to want to go away. But actually what you need to do is to open up. And so it is in the opening up to the things that make us anxious that we learn to live. Now we're trapped again in the scream. Rollo May, a very good existential psychologist from the USA, read him. For instance, his Meaning of Anxiety. I know these are old books and psychologists are supposed to not read anything published before 2015, but I don't believe that. I go for the wisdom. I go for the things that last rather than for the recent things. And Rollo May is a keeper. Read his books. He distinguished between normal anxiety and neurotic anxiety, but what we call normal anxiety we might also call existential anxiety. So existential anxiety is about the experience of life being threatened, whereas normal anxiety is about conforming with society, and it is about things that you have learned to be afraid of. Paul Tillich, who was actually Rollo May's teacher, wrote an answer to May's book on anxiety, which was actually his doctoral thesis for his tutor, Paul Tillich. And Paul Tillich wrote a little book called The Courage to Be. Now that's 1952, and that's another keeper. Read that little book. It's very clever indeed. So he said, what we need is existential courage. It is the universal self-affirmation of your being in the presence of any threat to that being. So when you are aware of the dangers in your life and the possibility of the end of your life or the diminishment of your life, it is then that you need to open up to those possibilities, and then you discover the courage that allows you not to get rid of your anxiety, but to hold your anxiety. I go all around the world giving talks. And when I started giving talks in the 1980s, I used to be intensely anxious before any lecture. I literally would see my fingers tremble. I could literally not drink water because it would be like this. Now, not at all. I just feel an intense sense of responsibility in transferring something of what I know and understand to other people. I am so in the task of transmitting something that there isn't a single thought for my failures or what I will do wrong, or where I won't be as clear as I could be. I think, to hell with it. What I'll do is good enough. It's for you to take it from me. I'll do what I can to hand it to you, and then it's over to you. It's a joint business. We're in this together. You either want some of this understanding and knowledge, or you don't want it. It's not my responsibility, but it is my utter responsibility to give you the best of what I have learned in the best possible way. And when I stay focused on that task, I do not feel anxiety at all. So Tillich said, a neurotic person can take on board only a very little bit of non-being. So I was pretty neurotic in the 80s, trembling. Am I good enough? What will they think? Who cares? The average person can take on a limited amount of non-being. Everybody is limited. We all have our limits. You can say things to me that will crush me. You can do things to me that will kill me. We all have our limits. Let's be aware of them. The creative person, though, can accommodate a large amount of non-being. I showed you Van Gogh's picture. He obviously accommodated a large amount of anxiety and doubt and nothingness in his work, which is why it attracts us. Because he holds that. And other great painters hold that same contrast in the same way. One of the other great painters, like Rembrandt, for instance, who used the school of the clair-obscur, the chiaro-oscuro, which is the contrast of light and dark. They show you that same contrasting fact of nature and life, of things being both light and dark. Tillich then said, he was a theologian, he then said God can tolerate an infinite amount of non-being. All that is saying is to define God as that being which is beyond, the narrowness of human existence. It's the whole universe which accommodates all of the laws of dark and light and, whatever. So that's quite an interesting definition of God, which I think can accommodate most religions. I think I shall pass over Lang because time is going by a bit too fast. Lang, of course, was one of my teachers, as it were, so I've taken a lot of ideas from him, but his idea about ontological insecurity I had arguments with, because he argued that people become ontologically insecure when their families do certain things to them, and that makes them schizophrenic. I don't think it works like that. I don't think we can ever blame a family in that way. What we can observe, though, is that all human beings are ontologically insecure to begin with, and that some families are better than others at providing that safety where we can find that resting place to recharge our energy again. And if we can't grow up in a family that gives us safety, then it becomes much, much harder to be at ease with these challenges too. So, what follows from that is that when you work with people who are in that situation, it is crucial that you begin not by analyzing their psyche and getting all psychological about it, but by enabling them to find a safety in the world, physically and socially. They've got to be able to feel secure before you can do anything else. This is, of course, exactly what you need to do as a psychologist when you intervene in disasters. So when you work with people who go to help after a tsunami or some other natural disaster, you will teach them not to psychologize anymore, not to work with the emotions, but to help people make themselves physically secure and to find social support networks and put those in place before anything else. It's pretty well the same with people who are having breakdowns. That is like a natural disaster. In the breakdown, they need to be secured. They need to be very physically safe and contained. We cannot live without the anxiety, but we cannot live with too much anxiety either. So when anxiety turns into panic, we need to go back to the securing thing rather than the psychological thing. Sartre was very aware that living is an ontic struggle. It is a moral struggle, a daily dynamic challenge. So there can't be an abstract ethics. We can't have one rule that applies in all situations. We've got to see what a person's particular situation is and help them make sense of that. And that always is about dealing with these basic emotions. The big distinction to make about anxiety and fear is that anxiety is about nothing. Anxiety is when you are just anxious, building your energy because of things going wrong possibly. It becomes so excruciating. But with fear, there is a particular object. There is something that you are afraid of, something that is a threat to you. So anxiety is about being faced with your own responsibility. And as I said before, once you can assume that responsibility and see how you're going to deal with that responsibility, then you find courage. But with fear, there may be a real threat to your existence, which you need to learn to deal with in a very concrete manner. Fear, of course, leads to either fight, flight, or freeze. So you either want to fight an enemy who is threatening you, or flee away from that enemy, or if you can't do either of those, your body will rescue you and freeze you so that you won't actually feel pain, which is a miraculous thing. So people who have accidents, for instance, I was talking with somebody in the break about having accidents. I had a very serious bicycle accident at the age of 10, which left me in a coma. And I have absolutely no recollection of any of it, none at all, and no pain at all, no recollection of pain, even though I had to be in a darkened room for many weeks and sort of reconstitute myself completely. Memory completely gone. Nature protects you at those very extreme moments. So that is good to know, isn't it? When does anxiety lead to panic? Well, it's quite simple. Your anxiety is the energy that builds when something is expected of you, something is possible. So you know that I'm going to open this to questions in half an hour, and you might be sitting there thinking of the possibility of asking a question in public, and you're winding yourself up, the spiral of your energy is building. You know that feeling? You start to think, oh, I could say that, oh, I could say that. Well, will I have the courage to do that? Now, when you take your responsibility and you get up and ask the question, the energy is used. But if you sit there and you suppress it, the energy will slip and loop around, and that looping around of the energy with no objective is panic. And the same thing happens if you panic when you have to go home because somebody's waiting for you to come and collect them from school or something like that, and you realize you can't find your key, and then you can't get the key in the lock, and you're fumbling with it, and you think you won't be able to do this action. There is a moment where the anxiety of needing the energy to do these actions may slip into panic, where you stop actually being acutely connected to the objective of the project of opening that door. So with panic, there's always the breathing thing, of course. People need to breathe into something. It doesn't have to be a bag, by the way. Just learn to breathe into your scarf or into your hands or something like that. But you also need to learn to slow down. When in haste and in panic, slow down. Slow down. Do things extra slow. Focus. Pay attention. The moment you focus, your anxiety finds its objective and you become strong again. That's the thing to remember about panic. I will not say too much about Heidegger's Unheimlichkeit, which means not being at home, because that is what he thought anxiety was about, a feeling of being uncannily disconnected from everything and not having safety. But he didn't think that was a pathology. He said that is the true state of human beings. Truly, we are not at home. Truly, we are unheimlich. And that is something we need to come to terms with. That's what it is. Okay, so we do need to live with anxiety. We've made that point. Anxiety discloses our potential, our possibilities. It's a good thing. You have to learn to do it and allow your anxiety to help you shape your life and to struggle with it, because only in that struggle will you find your freedom. And we're all inclined to close off our freedom, Heidegger said, in all these different ways, which I'm sure you'll all recognize. We let ourselves be taken over by the world, being fascinated by lots of things, not really choosing what it is we want, being shaken from one thing to another. We fall in with other people, we just do what they tell us or what we imagine they want us to do. We tranquilize ourselves in hundreds of ways, doing protective sheltering of ourselves. We back away from challenges. We seek comfort. We shirk our tasks. We shirk our tasks. We forget. We close things off. We cover them up. We're not transparent to ourselves. We make things opaque. We evade challenges, we flee from things, we distract ourselves, we become irresolute, we become alienated and inauthentic. We negate our depth and our limits, we disown our existence, we become indifferent to the world. These are all the ways in which people get out of touch with their emotions. And it is anxiety that brings this back to you. It rescues you from your shirking, your fleeing, and your comforting. It reminds you that you constantly have a choice. You can either opt for being authentic, and the way Heidegger defines authenticity is facing up to the limits of life. It's not about being truly yourself. It's about facing the limits of life, thinking about your death, thinking about your failures, thinking about your doubt, thinking about everything that's wrong in your life, facing up. That's being authentic. Being inauthentic is just going along with what other people expect of you. And what Heidegger said is not be authentic the whole bloody time. What he said was become aware that all of us, every minute of the day, have a choice between approaching our lives authentically, with open eyes and true to our feelings, or inauthentically, playing a game, pretending, getting away with stuff, doing things in a half-hearted way. We have a choice. You don't have to do the one or the other. You constantly have a choice. That's the thing to remember. So anticipating death is a way to get beyond that. This is really my great work on Heidegger that I did as part of my doctorate in philosophy, to really pull out of Heidegger what puts you in truth and what puts you in untruth. I have no time to belabor it. So in a very simple way, it is all about being faced with the paradox, the polarity of life all the time, and becoming aware of that. So as I said, there are these 4 levels. So at the physical level, there are certain things we love and desire, things we love, remember what you wrote down, and desire. And there are certain things we fear and want to avoid. But they come in pairs. And the truth about paradox is that you can't have one without the other. And that's just how it works in life. I'm really sorry about that, but that's how it works. So no, you can't just go and have a life that is all about what you love and desire. If you want these things, you're bloody well going to have to deal with these too. So, in the physical world, you can't have pleasure if you're always avoiding pain. You can't have pleasure if you are so afraid that you will have pain that you paralyze yourself. It's only when you're prepared. I just came back from a trip to Argentina, and on the way back we went to see the grandchildren in the United States, and then we stopped over in Iceland. And after 20 years of not doing this, I was foolish enough to go pony trekking in Iceland. And I thought, what the hell am I doing? I'm nearly 68. What if I fall off this damn pony? And then I thought, come on, just do it. And facing the possibility of injuring myself was quite anxiety-provoking initially. But the great pleasure I got out of trekking around Iceland on this pony was incredibly friendly and obedient, and it was really quite safe. Was so amazing, and it just proved to myself that, you know, I say these things to people, but when it comes to my own life, I constantly have to reinvent these things for myself, and I constantly have to weigh it up, you know, how much pain am I willing to face in order to have this pleasure? How much, you know, where am I going? How much can I encompass? And how safe do I want to make myself feel? And how much do I want to play, you know, the card of protecting myself?
Just to be you.
Just to me, yeah, that's right, exactly that. And it is, you know, a momentary thing. You have to ask yourself that again and again. So the same is true for love and hate at the social level. You're never going to have a loving relationship unless you are willing to admit how you hate this other person sometimes. And far, far worse, until you admit how hateful you are to that person some of the time. To come to terms with your own hateful capacity is the absolute key to becoming a loving person. You cannot love somebody by saying, oh, I love you so much, I love you so much. No, real love comes from carefully seeing how you are with a person and monitor your attitude towards them and become aware of what love consists of. And when love is overshadowed by other things, and take responsibility for that, then you can create a loving relationship. And I speak from great experience, having been married 3 times and having learned the hard way how important it is to really challenge yourself rather than find fault with the other person. That is absolutely the key. Same is true here at the personal level. We all want this strong identity, but that's opposed to being free. You can only be free if you're not so defined, if you stay open. And the moment you want to be sure and you want to be something, you also give up some of your freedom. So it's a constant negotiation. How much identity, how much freedom? How much do I want to be a something, and how much do I want to remain open to nothing, which means everything? You can't be everything and yet feel sure of yourself. To feel sure of yourself, you have to connect up to certain things. You have to say, I am now a lecturer. Of course, I'm not really a lecturer. I'm just somebody who's talking to you. But when I define myself as a lecturer, it gives me a kind of gravitas, a kind of identity that protects me. But it also shields me from a lot of other things. And it stops me being an artist, which I actually really like. My identity as an artist or a traveler or, a philosopher, many other things. So all these things are constantly in negotiation. At the spiritual level, same thing, between good and evil and meaning and futility. So at each level, we find these pairs that we have to learn to negotiate. And when I see clients, this is my kind of diagnostic frame. Where are the problems pinpointed? At what level are they struggling? Are they struggling with perfection and imperfection? Or are they struggling with good and evil or with love and hate? And usually it's many things. And the more things people struggle with, the more creative and open they are. Some people get really stuck on 1 or 2 things. Right, so here we go. That's the existential space in which we exist, with all these paradoxes and tensions. And in each of these spaces, the information we get about these things comes through our emotions, because emotions are our orientation. So we're not just physically located in the world, we're emotionally located in the world. There is a mood in us, and there is a mood in a room, there is an atmosphere, and we learn to either tune into that or tune out of it. And we are like prisms. So our consciousness is affected by the emotions in the world and the situations and the events in the world, and it affects us. It makes us resonate. If you think of it in terms of light, we are refracting the light that comes to us. And we can either let the light through, or we can magnify it, or we can block it, or divert it, or change it. So to tune into your emotions is to become aware of how you do that. And I have worked with this model of the emotional compass for many decades, and one of my objectives was to do what the task that Karl Jaspers set us when he said emotions come on a spectrum. They are actually arranged exactly like color is on a spectrum. I took that seriously, and I discovered that he was absolutely right. So there are the primary colors and the secondary colors, as you probably know. So there are only 3 primary colors: yellow, red, and blue. And when you combine those, you get the secondary colors. So red and blue makes purple, and red and yellow makes orange, and yellow and blue make green. So there must be 3 primary emotions and 3 secondary emotions, and then, just as with color, a multitude of different emotions of different shades and gradients, exactly like this. And there can be also greater or lesser intensity of those emotions, so they can be lighter or darker, which means more or less saturation of that particular flavor of emotion. So bear all that in mind. It gets a bit complex. So now I'm going to simplify it for you. This is my emotional compass, which is not just randomly arranged. It is arranged exactly like the rainbow, and it works because that is how emotion is. And that is based on Aristotle, Spinoza, Sartre. It fits together perfectly and it makes perfect sense. Let me explain. Here at the top, the high, the north, if you like, the south, the west, the east. It's also like a clock, but it's also like a spectrum. All of that works together. So this is you resonating with the world, with something that you love. Look at your list. Look at something you love. When you are united with that something you love, you are in that orange mood of exhilaration, happiness. You are at one with what feels safe and good. When you start to become a little bit more sharp about that, a bit more possessive about it, and you sort of take pride in it rather than just experiencing it, then you start to feel confident, which may be a very good thing, and you start to maybe also feel a bit arrogant about it. So you become a bit possessive. So the color becomes a bit sharper. There's a bit more red in it. When you go down a bit further with it, when you feel there is a threat to the thing that you love, so somebody might take it away, you start experiencing the emotion of jealousy. Jealousy is the state we're in when we say, no, that's mine. Not you, mine. We're protective. We worry about something that's important to us, a value, a meaning. We are vigilant. So, as you can see, there are many different words that fit in each of those places with each of those colors. And the art of therapy is often about enabling people to discover that no, it's not being a bad person to be jealous. What jealousy tells you is that there is something about that relationship that makes you uneasy and aware that you're under threat, and you have become vigilant about it. And often people who are jealous, I work with couples often, when a partner is jealous, it tells us something about how the relationship is under threat and how this partner is actually standing up for the relationship by being vigilant about it. So that's the first rule to remember. Never condemn yourself or another person for any emotion. Every emotion is valuable, is a message, is a vital thing that helps you find the right direction in your life. Every single emotion can be negative or positively lived. Every emotion is a friend, is a friend. Learn to befriend your emotions. When people are sent to me because they have an anger problem and want to learn to overcome their anger, I think you don't have an anger problem. you have a problem with the world. You have a problem because I know what anger means. Anger is this here, where your value, and I need to find out what that value is, the thing you love and that's most meaningful to you, feels constantly under threat by something. You constantly feel in alarm and alert, and so you constantly overreact. What on earth is going on with you, mate? Let's talk about it. What you doing here? Why are you losing your temper the whole time? And sure as anything, what we will find is that that person is constantly frustrated by being in an skewed situation. It's almost always situational. Your emotions are an indication of the situation you find yourself in. Do not blame yourself for them. Do not blame other people for them. Understand them. Understand what they relate to. When this guy says to me, I could have killed her. She humiliated me. She called me this, that and the other. Why was that so humiliating to you? You know you're not that. It was humiliating to me because I bloody well think I am like that. This is the problem, and we don't see it. You only get angry if you think there is a reason for it. People are insecure when they get angry or under extreme attack. Now, I was somebody who couldn't experience anger until I was 19, because I was created into a good girl who had to always keep the peace and who always knew better than my terrible, terrible sister who was 3 years older. And I discovered at 19 that I could have a temper too sometimes like her. It had just been suppressed. So that too can happen. You can be taught to be always angry and react to everything with outrage, or you can be taught to suppress that and go straight away down here into a more depressed position. Giving up, giving in. What I learned to do, of course, was that if somebody threatens something, it's often the more elegant way to go along with the loss and to reformulate your value in a new way that gets around them and that gets you back on top again. I learned that to move in life with not just your emotions, but your desires and your objectives is much more effective than getting stuck in a particular situation that you cannot resolve until you're willing to negotiate again, or to change, to transform the situation. And that's essentially what psychotherapy does. It helps you become aware of how you have become stagnant in situations, what the meaning of it is, and how you can become more fluid with that and become transformative in the way in which you encounter the world and your problems. Well, at least that's how I do psychotherapy. Right, so one down and you're in fear. So fear is when you run away, right? Because it's all too much. Then you've lost it completely and now you're in sorrow. This is your grieving process. But of course there's also another side to these things. So the letting go, remember, is also about releasing something. It's also about sleeping. It's about nurturing yourself again. So if you're always up here actively fighting and stuff, you can't sleep. You're always worrying, you're always sorting something out, or you're always fighting. You can't sleep. You've got to come to let go. Every evening you've got to do the work of letting go of the frustrations of the day. Otherwise you can't find your sleep. Your sleep comes to you immediately, the moment you give in to all your failures. And you say, oh, I did this wrong, I did that wrong. Oh, look, there's plenty to do tomorrow. Now I've done my job for today, and then you fall asleep. Right, so if you stay there though, if you stay in bed all the time, you go into depression, right? Nothing becomes possible anymore. Everything is, you're blue now, right? You're blue. And then there's only one way forward, that is to allow in some anxiety. And now I promised you I would explain to you why anxiety and depression go hand in hand. Because the anxiety is worst when you're used to feeling low and depressed and avoid the world and then allow to peek out into the world looking at something you have to hazard out to do again, then you feel the anxiety. So this is something you know when you work in psychiatry. When somebody comes in who is depressed and has been in bed for weeks or, really totally depressed, clinically depressed, and you give them these antidepressants, within 24 hours, the suicide risk is the greatest. Why? Because when they're deeply depressed, they don't even have the energy to kill themselves. But give them the antidepressants and they start to feel the rise of their anxiety and their energy again. And then, if they haven't dealt with the situation yet, they might actually take action. So that's exactly what happens here. So this whole rising up towards things you love is about anxiety. All of these emotions are colored to some extent with anxiety. Here first, it's about shame and guilt, where you think you're no good. So that's typically what happens to depressed people when they're getting a bit better. They start saying things like, oh, I'm no good. I'll never be able to do that. There's no hope for me. I'm just crap. I'm just rubbish. I can't do that at all. No, there's no point in doing it. It will make no difference. That's the typical discourse of somebody who's negotiating out of their giving up state, out of their depression, going up towards the anxiety. And what do you encourage? You encourage them to accept that they're crap. Yeah, of course you're crap. You haven't done anything for the last 3 months. We can only get good at something by practicing it and undertaking new things. Of course, we're all crap when we don't do stuff. When I went back on that pony, after 25 years not on a horse, I was crap too. You lose it too over the decades, you can't take things for granted. You have to do and practice things to stay powerful, to keep something going. And the moment you give up on stuff, it seeps away from you. So yes, this is the difficult thing to overcome. And the next stage is often about curiosity, but also about envy. I always think envy is a good sign. When green with envy. When people start saying, oh, it's all right for them. I got all these friends, they have easy lives. It all just comes to them, Look, they drive a wonderful car and they have these great jobs. That's never going to happen for me. I'm so envious about it. That's actually something about aspiration in there. Okay, so that's what you want. Or is that really what you want? Do you just want this car? Or is it actually something else you're after? What is it actually you love and want? What is actually your aspirational project, your value? What is it worth your while to get out of bed for? What do you want to achieve with your life? What do you want to look back on when you get old and ancient like I am? Well, it certainly isn't staying in envy of other people, is it? That's not very satisfactory for any of us. So we move on and we take that step towards desiring things, being resolute about our projects, and then we find our courage, because now we're getting going. And this is also where we find love, because love is not just a feeling, it's a thing we do. Love is an attitude. It is saying, I love that, or I love you. That means that is something worth my effort. You are worth my energy. It is about working with another. It is about doing stuff. It's not about receiving things ever. that's just a little bonus. Love is about doing something, making something good with something or somebody that is worth your while. It's a task. It's an ongoing, day-by-day thing to do. And when it works, you feel thrilled, you feel excited, you feel the joy of things coming together, of things feeling good. That's what joy is. And it's very short-lived usually, because you know how it goes. You get on top here and you get happy, and then you start losing it again. And if you don't lose it in one way, you'll lose it in another way, because you can't have everything at the same time. So your relationship might be going well, but then you get sacked from your job. Well, or, you know, your car breaks down or your child falls ill. There's always something that takes you down. But hopefully you have so many different connections, so many different things you're working at, that it all stays in flow, and that you have the pleasure of all of those different actions and emotions happening at the same time, and that you start to feel that you can master it and be good at it and enjoy it. And that's where I have to leave it for today. Thank you very much.